through Project STEM 4.6 Exercise A. For this assignment, you are going to do this in your TextSmart, not in Replit, and you're going to use this video as a reference. So I would recommend starting the program on your own, read through the comments, think through how you're going to solve it. Once you've tried your best with your code, then come back to the video, check to see how you did, and as a reminder, your solution could potentially look different than mine, but it may still work. If that's the case, just use mine as a reference. If you're confused or you're not sure how to start, this is a great way for you to at least get started. In this video, we're going to go up to step 4. Every time you start your program, make sure you create your comments at the top of your program. For my code, I'm just going to use like the hashtag comments, the line comments for each piece of my program. For easy reference, I'm going to copy and paste the directions for the first part into my code. And I'm just going to use this as a reference. So I'll end up deleting these as we go through. Please make sure you read through the directions before you start. In the first part of your program, create a for loop that runs 3 times. Because it says it's a for loop and that it runs 3 times, I am going to be using a for range loop. So I'm going to create my loop. Before I create my loop, I'm going to make my comment, for loop that runs 3 times. I'm going to do for I, and again, I'm using I because it's in range. In Replit, it kind of does like an autofill. So it does I in range 3 because I want it to loop through 3 times. It's going to go through 0, 1, and 2. Then it says inside the for loop, prompt the user for an integer. So because I want integer, I'm going to create a variable, assign it to num. Yours may be different than mine. And I'm going to do int, input, enter, and integer. Okay. I'm actually going to turn this piece off. Okay. And then it says prompt the user for another integer. So I'm going to call this num1 equals, and same thing, I'm going to ask for another integer, and it's assigning it to num1. Call the function compare. You are going to create this function next. So I haven't created function compare. So I'm going to call it compare. And the next line says pass the variables you used for the integer inputs above. The integer inputs above are these 2 that we created here, num and num1. So I'm going to take compare. It's passing in 2 parameters, num, comma, num1. And again, as you can see, Replit kind of predicts what those values will be, and so that's why it's grayed out. But then in my code, I actually do have num and num1. I'm going to go through and comment this. This line prompts user for an integer. And then my next line, again, prompts user for another integer. Okay, a few things about comments. They're just a statement, right? They do not and should not be complete sentences. They're just like a quick prompt to tell users what those lines of code do. This one here calls function compare. So this is my first step here. I'm going to delete that, and then that's the first part of my exercise A. Now I'm going to go back to Project STEM. I'm going to copy and paste step 3. Put these in paragraph comments. Okay. And again, make sure you read these directions. It says create a function called compare. Remember, the function definition should go at the top of the program and use 2 variables in the parameters of the function. So I'm going to start up here. Just like what your directions say, functions are always defined at the top of your program. So before you do any code, even if you haven't used your function yet, you should be defining it first. So def compare, and it's taking in 2 parameters. So they can be any values, any names of these parameters or variables. That's up to you what you want to choose. Then it says inside of the function, create an if, else structure that compares the 2 values passed into the function. So I know I'm going to have an if with something, else if with something, and then else with some sort of condition. Okay, so let's keep reading. I'm going to compare the values passed into the function, and then as we continue, it tells us exactly what you want inside. If one value is less than the other, output that to the user. Example, 2 is less than 4. Else if the other value is less than the other, output something similar. Example, 4 is less than 9. Else, output that they're equal. So again, yours might look different here. I'm just going to compare num1 is less than num2. And if num1 is less than num2, I want to print num1 plus is less than plus num2. I'm going to continue this. Else if num1 is greater than num2, and if num1 is greater than num2, I'm actually going to just copy and paste that line. I'm going to say num2 is less than num1. My last step is my else, and it says else output that they are equal. So then my last print statement, num1 is equal to num2. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this, and it will give me an error after I run it. So I do 3, 4, and it tells me unsupported operand type int and string. That means I need to typecast these because I'm adding an integer to a string to an integer. So these all need to be typecasted. So we're going to typecast that to a string. And make sure you're updating yours as we go through it here. Again, if you haven't solved this yet, make sure you're pausing it first. Solve it on your own, so that way you can work through this with confidence on your own. Okay, so I'm going to delete this piece. Now I have my function compare, and let's see, that is it for the first part of the program. So I'm going to run this one more time to double check. And down here, you'll see my second run. So I'm actually going to close out of my console. I'm going to run it one more time so I can see it. And I'm going to enter an integer 3, 4. It says 3 is less than 4, which is correct. -2, 3, -5. -5 is less than -3. Let's do one more. 10 and 10. 10 is equal to 10. And it does loop 3 times, right? And that's what we wanted it to do. So that is it for the first part.